Welcome. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. I'm glad that you took a few moments to join us today. Hey, the lighting is not ideal today. I'm sitting out on the back patio. It's overcast and rainy, but it's absolutely beautiful. Anyway, the lighting is not ideal to record this video, but the recording must go on. And I thank you for taking time to be with us. Today we'll be reflecting on the topic of when hope for justice is lost. When hope for justice is lost. And we'll be doing that by looking at a passage of scripture from 1 Samuel, the 8th chapter, looking at verses 4 through 20. It's when the elders of Israel came to Samuel and asked Samuel to appoint a king for them. Starting at verse 4 of chapter 8 of 1 Samuel. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us then a king to govern us like other nations." But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to govern us." So Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people and all they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them, just as they have done to me from the day I brought them up out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods. So they are doing to you. Now then, listen to their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them." So Samuel reported all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. He will appoint commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give it to his officers and courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and donkeys and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, "No, but we are determined to have a king over us, so that we may be like other nations, and that king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles." If there were an alternative title to this reflection today, it would come from those last set of verses. The danger of being like everyone else. The danger of being like everyone else. But we'll stick with the first subject, when hope for justice is lost. Just for a little background, the people of Israel had come out of bondage in Egypt, and they had moved into the Canaanite and the area surrounding, and they lived. They didn't live with a big formal government. They didn't have a king in place, as you can see. But instead, from time to time, God would raise up judges to help arbitrate matters for people. Because when you have people living together, you have disputes, and you need to have the disputes solved equitably and fairly in ways. When dangers were to arise, particularly external dangers from the people living around them, God would raise up judges who would often lead the people and organize them and lead them into battle to resist what was going on. So they didn't have a formal government or kingship in the sense that most of the ancient world and the nations around them did, but they lived more as just a collection of people with no king but God. But they had lost hope in that. That the judges that had been raised up in this case were following after Samuel, were Samuel's own sons, his own family, and they weren't like Samuel. They were not just. They were people who could be swayed by power. They could be swayed by money, Instead of looking out after the well-being of the people that they were supposed to be caring for, they often looked out for their own well-being and their own best interest instead. So the elders of Israel and the people of Israel had lost complete hope in justice. And when they lost hope, they started looking for their own solutions. They started looking for their own solutions. They started looking out to see how other folks were doing things. And they decided that they wanted to be like everyone else and have a king. You know, sometimes I believe there's nothing more dangerous than a person or a group of people or a nation of people who have lost hope. I'm sure that there's nothing more dangerous to himself, herself, and others than a person who's lost hope. Because many times when a person loses hope in the situation, they will settle for a whole lot less than they deserve. When a person loses hope in a situation, they will stop trying to make things work in that situation and sometimes follow a different path, a path that would be a lot less for them. This is what the people of Israel did there. They didn't see how things were going to work with judges coming up from time to time. They didn't trust that. They wanted to always know that they were going to have a strong leader who was going to lead them and defend them. They always wanted to know that there was always going to be someone who was actually going to govern them and give them directions. They always wanted to know that there was going to be someone who would take care of them. See, their desire was to be taken care of and to be cared for, and they wanted to empower someone who would have that duty. I believe many times that's a legitimate need that we all have, that we all want to be cared for. We all want to make sure that we have what we need. We all would like to see that there's justice. We all want to know that when we are threatened in some way, in some serious way, that there's some way or some person, some institution that we can turn to that would be all about taking care of us, leading us, guiding us, making provision for our security and our well-being. But they didn't trust the vision that God had given them. They no longer trusted that vision. They just didn't see how it could work. They didn't see how it could work, so they decided to settle for the vision of the surrounding nations, of the nations that surrounded them. They didn't see how God's vision for them could actually work, so they began to look and adopt the visions of the other nations that are around them. Oh, there's so much in that. There's so much in that. Individually and collectively, I believe that there's nothing more dangerous than people who have lost hope. I came of age during the crack epidemic. I had an opportunity to talk to people who were in the business of dealing. Most of them had left the business by the time I had conversations with them. I saw interviews, I read articles and stories and reflections on it. And the crack world was a dangerous world. The laws were very harsh and punitive, and if someone got picked up, they were eventually going to spend a whole bunch of time in prison, almost all of their lives in prison. And that's if the violence didn't get them, because the violence had gotten to be pretty severe and epidemic. So anyone who was going into that world, there were basically two futures for them. There was the cemetery or the penitentiary. One of the things that came out over and over again when you would hear the interviews is that they knew that there was no future in the crack game for themselves. They knew that it was likely going to end with their being in the penitentiary or being in the cemetery. But the thing is, they didn't see any other way. They didn't have hope that they could make it. Many of them have been crushed by poverty, and they didn't have any hope that the system was ever going to work for them. They didn't see a way. They didn't see a way out, and so they decided to look around. And it seemed like many of the people who were doing well were some of the dealers. They were the ones who had money. They were the ones who had clothes. They were the ones who had cars. And even if they couldn't have it for a long time, even if it meant that they were going to end up in the cemetery or the penitentiary, they decided that they wanted to live before they died. So they often gave up on on the things and systems that they no longer believed in. They didn't believe that if they just worked hard and played by the rules, if they went to school and tried to get an education, that they would be able to get a job that was going to ever deliver for them the quality of a quality of life and the well-being. And so many people turn to this dead end path, this path that led to so much suffering. We see it in nations. When you look at Germany after World War I and before World War II, the nations, the victorious nations in World War I had been very, very punitive to Germany, and the people of Germany lived under very austere conditions, and many of them had lost hope that things were going to be good, that they could actually have a good life. And you actually had in the Third Reich someone who was promising to restore their strength, to restore their dignity, to restore their honor, and to bring wealth. You had someone who had easy answers for their problems, and they had made scapegoats for their problems. There was easy solutions. So you saw the people of Germany between World War I and World War II had actually looked at this other way, that it got against. It really went against everything that was good and decent in many ways, but they had embraced it because it gave them hope. They didn't have hope that continuing on in the present course would matter. You see it on an individual level. We see it with nations. We see it repeated through history. Sometimes when people don't have justice, they get mad and they take to the streets and they riot. They burn things. They demolish things. These are all the symbols of the people who have lost hope. When people lose hope, individually and collectively, it can be a very dangerous thing, and people start looking for other solutions and start looking for other options. You see it even on an individual level sometimes in relationships. How many people have settled for a relationship that is far less than the one that they deserve, far less than the one that they could have, one that is not healthy, one that is often toxic, but it is the relationship that is available to them, and they don't have hope that they're ever going to find the relationship that really matches their ideal, the vision that is even described in scriptures in some ways of what a loving relationship looks like. And since that no longer looks available to them, they don't have any hope of that. They settle. They settle for something that is far less. How many of us are maybe settling or making decisions that are far less than what God has for us because we've lost hope? We've lost hope for justice in this society. I sometimes wonder about our society that we have here. You know, at this point, we actually have more guns than people in our society. And I know some people just like to shoot as hobbyists, and some people are collectors, and some people like to go out and hunt. That's a family tradition that's passed down. But there's also another strain where there's many people who have guns because they believe that is what's going to provide them their personal protection. They believe that is what is going to bring them their liberty. And many of them fear that there may be a time when society breaks down and they need to be prepared to defend themselves. I submit to you that these are people that don't have a whole lot of hope that the world that we live in the society that we live in will be just and is just. In many cases, the gun has become kind of like the king that ultimately is going to protect them and to secure their safety and their security. We're like the people of Israel. They didn't necessarily trust God to lead them anymore. They don't see how that's going to work. So, many times when we decide that we're going to solve our own problems, God is gracious to us and allows us to solve our own problems. Many ways, this is the blessing of freedom, but this is also the tragedy of the way we use our freedom. That God will listen to us and allow us to solve our own problems in the way that we choose to solve them. But in this case, God advised the prophet Samuel to at least warn the people the cost of not trusting God, the cost of not keeping hope in the vision that God had for them, the cost of not having hope in that. So Samuel reported the words, and if you look at how extensive it is, that the king I wonder if the people wanted a king because they saw the wealth and the power of the king, and they thought that that could be their wealth and that power. Well, we see with Samuel that that's not the case. There was kings were wealthy and they were powerful, but their wealth and their power were not broadly shared. That the king took all the good stuff. The king took all the land, or took the best of the land, the best of the animals, the best of the flocks, the best of the harvest, and used it for himself and for his inner circle, for him and his commanders and his in his court. They are the ones who enjoyed all the spoils and the riches of the land, and the people have become more or less slaves to the king. The people were there to serve the king rather than the king serving the people. That seems to be often the way it is when we set up a society that is not governed under the principles of God. That the poor and the regular folks actually are there to serve the interest and the desires of the wealthy and the powerful. That there may be a whole lot of wealth, but it's really just confined to just the top percent. When we trust in a system in a way that is not the vision that God has for us, because God has a very, very special vision for us. We believe as followers of Jesus that Jesus kind of articulated it really well in multiple places. It's a world in which both the poor and the poor in spirit have what they need. Where those who hunger and thirst, they're fed, and their thirst is quenched. And that's on a physical level. It's also on a spiritual level. It's a vision where there's justice and well-being. Justice being well-being for all, even the prisoner, even the stranger, the immigrant who's coming through. It's a place where the well-being of everyone is kept. But sometimes we trust other systems to deliver that well-being for us. We trust other systems to do that. In this case, in ancient Israel, they wanted to trust the king so that they could be like everyone else. Sometimes I wonder in our society if it's not the market that we've made our God. Because sometimes in studying economics, we trust the invisible hand of the market to allocate resources to those who are most able to use them. We trust that the market actually produces the greatest amount of wealth for a society. In many ways, it's the market kind of like our king, where we have made ourselves slaves to the market instead of having the market serve us. Where the market economics are supposed to serve the well-being of everyone with our economic and our political systems. But we see in terms of markets a great concentration of wealth that becomes self-serving. We see this with Samuel. That's kind of the way it happens with human endeavors. When you appoint a king, the king is supposed to serve the people, but the king ultimately ends up serving himself, and the people become the servants of the king. Have we in our society made a similar thing where we've left so much to markets and we've trusted the markets to serve us, but we in fact have become the servants of the market, and we've lost track of the vision in which everyone has enough? We're pleased to host a service unit where we have young people that come from all over the nation and also from the world. We have folks who come over from Germany. One of the things that some of our international folks are shocked by, they're literally shocked by the fact that we have people living homeless on the streets, that here we are in the U.S., the wealthiest nation on earth, and we have people homeless living on the streets. We have mentally ill living in the streets. We have people that don't have access to health care, that don't have access to good housing. They are shocked at the number of times that our water is not safe to drink, where we have to boil water or use bottled water. We kind of look and wonder, have we been like the people of Israel here, that we've given up hope in the system that God had for us and the vision that God had for us, the vision of a society where we provide for everyone, to make sure that there's justice for everyone, that everyone has what they need. Not that everyone has the same thing, because they were wealthy and they were poor, but the poor would actually have an opportunity to have their bellies filled, that the poor would have an opportunity to go to courts and seek justice, and be able to trust that their case would be heard, and that justice didn't just go to the wealthy and the well-connected. Have we lost hope in this vision? So we settle for less. We settle for the world as it is. We put other institutions in place that run more under the world standards than under the standards that God has for us. And then we see that we suffer, that many people suffer with hopelessness and have no opportunity, and that we actually serve the system rather than the system serving us. It all happens when we lose hope. So, brothers and sisters, let's not lose hope. Let's allow ourselves to be informed by the beautiful vision that Jesus painted, that many of the people who came before Jesus painted, of a society in which there was justice, in the sense that even the poor had enough land to be able to eat and produce their own food, that even the poor and the unconnected could go before the judge and expect to receive justice in a dispute. To see that a world in which even the prisoners cared for, the widows and the orphans are cared for, those who can't care for themselves are cared for. To see a world where even the immigrant and the political refugee, the economic refugee, has an opportunity to find well-being. Sometimes we've lost hope that all of that is possible, so we've reverted to doing things the way other people do it. But I truly believe, as followers of Jesus, we are called to remain prisoners of hope, as one of the prophets wrote, Joel, I believe, to remain prisoners of hope, and to hold on to this vision, and to work for the vision, and not to settle for lesser visions. Peace be with you.